Indrid Cold. Indrid Cold, commonly known as the Smiling Man, is an allegedly humanoid entity. The nickname comes from the being's tendency to smile at almost everyone that he encounters. It is said that he still visits West Virginia to this day. For several months toward the end of 1966, the eyes of the world were focused on West Virginia, specifically on Point Pleasant. Scores of people all reported seeing something similar. This creature became known as the Mothman. All of this seemed to lead to a terrible disaster when the Silver Bridge collapsed. All of this dominated headlines and newspapers. However, very deep inside the pages of the press were claims of another bizarre sighting that was overshadowed by both Mothman and the Silver Bridge. His name was Indrid Cold, also known as the Grinning Man, and this figure has earned a reputation in American folklore that persists to this day. The legend of Indrid Cold. Indrid Cold was first seen on October 16, 1966, when two boys, Martin Mouse Munoz and James Jimmy Yankitis in New Jersey, were walking on 4th Street when they saw a surreal figure standing near a fence. As they walked closer, the figure was a tall, bald man wearing a metal green suit who was staring right at them with a huge grin. The idiosyncratic man chased them until they got away from him. UFO sightings were also reported around the area. Jimmy nudged me and said, "Who's that guy standing behind you?" I looked around and there he was. Behind that fence. Just standing there, he pivots around and looks right at us. Then he grinned, a big old grin. According to Night Mind, the boys only recalled the more frightening details of their encounter later on. They would recall that the man in the green suit was unusually tall and had unnatural facial features, such as a lack of ears and a nose. Even though most sources mention the New Jersey sighting, Indrid Cold and the Grinning Man could be completely different entities. Woodrow Derenberger made his living by selling sewing machines. November 2, 1966, was a long day for him. By 7 p.m., he was driving along a hill just outside Parkersburg on Interstate 77 and was looking forward to arriving at home. On this cold and wet evening, the last thing he wanted was to have to stop on the side of the road to replace a sewing machine that had become dislodged in the back of his vehicle. The sewing machine was undamaged and he quickly repositioned it. Derenberger might have parked a little bit better, but he left enough room for other commuters to pass by his stationary vehicle while he tended to his business. None of these drivers came forward to confirm Derenberger's account of what followed. Having returned to the driver's seat of his van and continued on his way, a set of headlights passed him and began to slow down in front of him. For the second time, Derenberger had to stop. This time, he had to do so in the middle of the road. Careful not to dislodge any other appliances in his van, Woodrow was driving conservatively and was likely not driving anywhere near the speed limit. Despite this, his first thought centered on a patrol car and a possible sobriety test. He quickly dismissed this conclusion when he realized that he was not looking at a car at all. Whatever this was, it was shaped much like an old-fashioned kerosene lamp, with a central bulge and flared edges, during the Indrid Cold. A door slid open, and a man exited. According to Derenberger, this man was average in many ways. He had a deep tan and dark hair that was swept back. A deep tan was unusual for the time of year, but the extraordinarily broad grin that this man wore was easily the most striking thing about his appearance. As soon as the man exited, he began to head in Derenberger's direction. As the distance shortened, Derenberger noted that this man had a dark overcoat on, and beneath that, he wore a metallic-looking uniform that was green and glistened in the limited light. This man's arms were folded, and both sets of knuckles seemed to nestle within his own armpits. The man spoke. He identified himself as Indrid Cold and said that he came from a place less powerful than the United States. He was very reassuring and admitted that he was flesh and blood just like Woodrow and was in no way special or spectacular. Indrid also openly encouraged Woodrow to report the encounter to the authorities, and that confirmation would follow. Before he returned to his vehicle, Indrid revealed that this would be just the first of several such meetings the pair would have. The whole message was delivered by something similar to telepathy, and not a single word was spoken verbally. Both Indrid Cold and the vehicle departed the scene. Contacting the investigator, Indrid Cold did keep his word. Woodrow received several additional visits from the same man. On some of these subsequent visits, Indrid was not alone. Derenberger revealed that his new friends came from a planet called Lanulos and that, during one visit, he was allowed to take a trip there. After the last of these meetings, Woodrow sought out renowned UFO investigator John Keel, who happened to also write a book about Mothman, and reported the events in great detail. Purportedly, during Keel's investigations, he often received mysterious phone calls from someone calling himself Indrid Cold. This was nothing new for him, of course, but he did mention persons and not persons. Keel believed that whoever phoned him was an informed third party. Despite this, Keel wrote a foreword in Derenberger's book Visitors from Lanulos. A man with a grin. Woodrow Derenberger was not the only person to report an appearance by a sinister-looking grinning man. On the very same night, on the very same road, two other men saw an elongated object land in front of their vehicle. They were also forced to stop, and they watched as a man got off and headed their way. He wore a dark coat and folded both arms in a way that could be considered uncomfortable. Before the man returned to the craft, which subsequently took off, he asked both men questions that seemed pointless to them. Third sighting. During the same period in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the Lilly family had been reporting poltergeist activity in their home, such as diamond-shaped lights. Lily's daughter, Linda, was sleeping one night when she awoke to see a man standing over her. It was a man, a big man. Very broad. I couldn't see his face very well, but I could see that he was grinning at me. He walked around the bed and stood right over me. When I screamed again and hid under the covers, when I looked again, he was gone. Description. The grinning man is reported to be human-like in appearance, though he is commonly associated with UFO activity and is sometimes believed to be an alien. It is also possible that he is associated with the Men in Black. His first sighting, he was described as being over 6 feet tall and wearing a reflective green suit with a black belt. He had a dark complexion and small, beady eyes set far apart. He was described as not having a nose, ears, or hair. In his second known encounter, his suit was said to be blue instead of green, but it still retained its reflective property. Along with that, he was described as looking perfectly natural with slicked back hair, a coat with the top 2 buttons unbuttoned, and having pants lighter than the coat but still the same material. He was also described as being quite tan, though not dark, and looking like any normal human being. There are other versions of the legend involving other sightings. However, not much else has been heard of from the grinning man since the 1960s. Who he was is unknown, but many consider the encounters to have been a contrived hoax. Nonetheless, he has earned a legendary reputation that persists to this day among the Men in Black and the Black-Eyed Kids. Interestingly, a recent admission by a man on Reddit claims that he was hit by the Indrid Cold. Explanation. It is commonly believed that Indrid may be an alien entity, which is supported by its close connection with UFO activity and with Derenberger's sighting. It is also said by Derenberger that the grinning man is in fact a species of alien with multiple grinning men. However, this is unlikely unless the aliens are shapeshifters, because it would be almost impossible for a race to take the exact same evolutionary path as us. However, the third sighting by the Lilly family suggests instead that it may be a ghost or spirit of some kind and was connected with poltergeist activity happening in the residence. It may be a prank that went too far, or a man with a mental illness. Others believe that it is a normal human being or a hoax based on the popularity and fear of the Mothman, who was first sighted around the same time. Tanya Derenberger mentions in her book that Indrid Cold might also be known as Valiant Thor, who spent 3 years at the Pentagon.